My husband filed for divorce and laughed in my face until the judge revealed my net worth. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Iris. It's been a while since that day in the courtroom, but honestly, it plays over in my mind like a movie reel I can't quite shut off. I'm Iris, I'm 29 years old, well, I was then, and I'm sitting in that courtroom watching my husband of 6 years laugh as he signs our divorce papers. I remember the smell of polished wood and stale coffee, and I remember Preston, my soon-to-be ex-husband, if you can believe it, just radiating this smug, cold confidence. He always thought I was just a naive small-town girl with no real ambition. He genuinely believed he was doing me a favor by letting me go. Little did he know that while he was cheating on me with his coworker, Brooke, I was building an empire right under his nose. The judge is about to read my financial statement, and I can't wait to see that smug smile disappear from his face. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times, and trust me, it's the only part of this whole nightmare that still feels truly sweet. Before I tell you how my soon-to-be ex-husband's expression completely changed, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one expected you to be capable. I know so many of you out there have been underestimated, and this story, this victory, is for all of us. I was a small-town girl from Tennessee who moved to Nashville to study accounting at Vanderbilt University. It's a classic story, right? Big dreams, humble upbringing. My parents had always taught me the value of hard work and saving money, lessons that would prove invaluable years later. You know, they believed in the simple life, paying cash, and working until your hands hurt. That kind of background doesn't exactly prepare you for the Nashville elite. I met Preston at a coffee shop near the university campus. I was there studying for a financial analysis exam when he approached my table. I swear, it was like a scene from a movie, only the movie turned out to be a horror film. He was a third-year law student from a traditional family of Nashville attorneys, and he radiated the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about money a single day in your life. Everything about him screamed old money, success, and influence. He was wearing an expensive watch, the kind that whispers "I'm important" instead of shouting it. He looked down at my accounting textbook spread across the table and his first words to me were, "You have potential. You just need the right guidance." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. I was young, I was naive, and I was flattered that a man like him was even paying attention to me. Now I realize it was both an insult and a preview of our entire relationship. He didn't see me as a person, he saw me as a project, something he could sculpt into the perfect accessory. He seemed perfect, ambitious, charming, successful, and apparently interested in me. Despite my ordinary background, our romance was a whirlwind. He took me to restaurants I could never afford, weekend trips to Gatlinburg, and introduced me to a lifestyle I had only seen in movies. But from the beginning, he was constantly improving my tastes and social circle. He criticized my Target clothes, suggested I cut my hair in a more sophisticated way, and made subtle comments about my college friends being limited in worldview. I remember one day he just handed me a credit card and told me to buy something respectable. I was making a modest income working part-time as an accounting assistant at a small firm. I loved my job, the analytical challenges, and the satisfaction of seeing numbers fit together perfectly. I was building my own little foundation. Preston, however, referred to it as my little job, and frequently suggested I didn't even need to work. "Why exhaust yourself for pennies when I can give you everything you need?" he would say. He truly did not understand that my career was about more than money. It was about my identity and independence. It was about proving to myself that I was more than just a girl from a small town. After 18 months of dating, he proposed during a romantic weekend in Gatlinburg. The ring was stunning, the champagne expensive, and the moment perfectly orchestrated for maximum impact. Several people in the restaurant even applauded. It felt like a fairy tale, and I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was an intimate ceremony in Savannah, Georgia, my choice despite his family's pressure for something grander in Nashville. Looking back, I realized that was one of the few times I managed to hold my ground against the Shannon family expectations. At least it was in a respectable location, even if it was simple, commented his mother, Lucille, Margaret in the original, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was my first real taste of how his family viewed me, as someone who wasn't quite good enough for their son. After our honeymoon in the Caribbean, we moved into his house in Belmead, one of Nashville's most exclusive neighborhoods. I'm telling you, everything in that house was sleek, expensive, and cold, much like his family. I tried to add personal touches, photos, colorful artwork, plants, but Preston preferred the minimalist aesthetic that showcased wealth rather than our personality as a couple. I remember hanging a watercolor painting I bought on a trip to Charleston, and he took it down immediately, saying it clashed with the contemporary lines. The first signs of trouble appeared within months. Preston questioned every decorating decision I made. He criticized my choice of friends and made subtle digs about my career path. Accounting is so common, he said once after meeting some of my colleagues. You have the potential to be exceptional, but you're wasting it on bookkeeping for companies no one's heard of. He said it with such casual disdain, like he was commenting on the weather. I felt my stomach clench, but I didn't say anything. I tried to fit into his social circle, the wives of other attorneys and executives who spent their days shopping at spas or planning charity events. They were pleasant enough to my face, but I never felt truly accepted. I overheard one of them at a dinner party referring to me as Preston's experiment with the middle class. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I went to the kitchen and just stared out the window at the perfect lawn, tears burning my eyes. Instead of defending me, Preston later suggested I try harder to fit in, maybe update my wardrobe or take up tennis. They just need to see that you're making an effort to adapt to our lifestyle, he explained, as if my identity was something to be molded and corrected. He didn't understand that I didn't want to be molded, I wanted to be loved for who I was. Those early years were a confusing mix of luxury and loneliness, being showered with expensive gifts while feeling my self-worth diminish. The gifts were a chain, not a kindness. I was slowly becoming what Preston wanted, a trophy wife who reflected well on him, while the independent, creative woman I had been was fading away. 2 years into our marriage, the tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. Preston had always been particular about our finances, but his behavior became increasingly controlling. Despite our joint accounts, he questioned every purchase I made while spending lavishly on himself without discussion. I felt like I needed a board meeting to buy a new pair of jeans. Did you really need another set of professional development books? He would ask, examining the credit card statement. That's $150 that could have been invested. Meanwhile, he thought nothing of dropping thousands on a new golf membership or expensive watches. I once saw a receipt for an inheritance planning seminar he attended, but I wasn't even allowed to ask about his family's trusts. Gradually, I found myself isolated from my friends and family. Visits to my parents in small-town Tennessee became less frequent because Preston always had an excuse. A work event, a dinner with clients, or simply that rural Tennessee is too provincial for my taste. My college friends stopped calling after Preston made it clear they weren't sophisticated enough for his home. I tried to invite my friend, Lena, over for a casual dinner once. Your friend Lena asked if our wine was from California, he scoffed after a dinner party I had organized. As if we would serve domestic wine to guests. It's embarrassing, Iris. The look on his face told me I had failed him again. My pride ached, but I swallowed it down, as always. My career, which had once been a source of pride, became a constant battleground. When I was offered a promotion to senior accountant, Preston wasn't supportive. Is the modest bump in salary worth the extra hours away from home? He questioned, looking genuinely annoyed. We're planning to start a family soon, remember? This was news to me. Whenever I brought up having children, he always said the timing wasn't right. His words felt less like concern and more like a carefully crafted way to keep me tethered to the house and to him. He wanted me available, not accomplished. It was around this time that I discovered my passion for financial consulting. The firm I worked for was expanding its services, and I volunteered to learn the advisory and strategic planning aspects. I found I had a natural talent for understanding investment patterns and creating financial strategies that delivered real results. I wasn't just balancing books anymore, I was mapping futures. That spark felt like the old Iris coming back to life. Excited about this new direction, I shared my idea of eventually starting my own boutique financial consulting firm with Preston. I thought, foolishly, that maybe he would finally see my potential, my real ambition. His response was crushing. He didn't even look up from his financial paper. Iris, be realistic. Starting a business requires business acumen, which isn't exactly your strong suit. He paused, then added, besides, most small businesses fail within the first year. Why risk what we have? That stung more than anything he'd ever criticized me for. It was a direct attack on my intelligence and my work ethic. Our approaches to money highlighted our fundamental differences. Preston believed in conspicuous consumption, the right address, the right car, the right vacation spots, all to maintain an image of success. Everything was a performance for him. I, with my middle-class upbringing, believed in saving, investing wisely, and finding value rather than just high price tags. I valued security, he valued status. As our third anniversary approached, Preston's late nights at the office became the norm rather than the exception. Big client, market analysis, quarterly reports. His excuses varied, but his absence remained constant. I ate dinner alone most nights, went to bed alone, and increasingly lived the life of someone single, but with the financial scrutiny of a child receiving an allowance. The house felt emptier and colder than ever. Our first truly major argument came after his family's annual Christmas gathering. It was the usual strained affair, and in the car ride home, his mother, Lucille, had pointedly asked when we would be giving her grandchildren. I mentioned that I was ready whenever Preston was, only to have him smoothly change the subject. The silence in the car afterward was deafening. When I confronted him at home, his reaction was cold. He was loosening his tie, already emotionally checked out. Children are a massive responsibility and expense, he said. With your modest career and my family's expectations, any child of ours would need trust funds, private schooling, the right connections. We're not there yet financially. Not there yet? I questioned, genuinely confused. Preston, you make 6 figures. Your family has generational wealth. What are we waiting for? His response was telling. He looked me dead in the eye and said, my money isn't the issue. You still haven't established yourself properly. What would you contribute to a child's future? The hurt of his words festered for days. It wasn't just the insult, it was the realization that he would use my background, my dreams, and even the idea of a family against me to maintain control. His dismissive attitude toward my career, which he called insignificant during another argument, solidified something in me. I needed financial independence. Not just for myself, but for my sanity. I was tired of feeling small. I was tired of asking permission. That week, I drove 10 miles out of Belmead and opened a separate bank account at a different bank. I felt like a spy, nervous about being followed, but the feeling of doing something entirely for myself was exhilarating. I set up a small direct deposit from my paycheck. It wasn't enough that Preston would notice if he checked our joint accounts, but it was enough to start building something of my own. Every single dollar in that account was a tiny brick of freedom. Simultaneously, I began educating myself on financial independence. I read books on investing, took free online courses on business management, and subscribed to newsletters about entrepreneurship. I did all of this in private browsing modes, careful not to leave digital breadcrumbs for Preston to discover. I didn't want to give him any ammunition or any reason to mock me. I remember watching videos late at night, covering my laptop screen with a throw blanket so the light wouldn't leak under the bedroom door. I was absorbing everything about risk assessment, portfolio diversification, and seed funding. the woman who had once been swept off her feet by grand gestures and expensive dinners, was slowly awakening to the gilded cage she lived in and planning her escape, one small step at a time. While Preston continued his late nights at work, or so I thought, I began laying the foundation for my independence. This wasn't just about saving money anymore, it was about building a fortress. Using my growing separate savings, I registered a small business entity, Iris Mitchell Financial Solutions. It felt incredibly professional just to see my name on the state form. Then I built a simple but professional website showcasing my portfolio and services. I kept the hosting account separate, paid for with a burner card I funded with cash deposits. My first challenge was finding time to work on my business without Preston knowing. I converted our rarely used guest bedroom into a home office, explaining to Preston that I needed a dedicated space for continuing education to advance at the firm. He barely paid attention to the change, dismissing my professional development as cute ambition rather than a serious endeavor. He just waved a dismissive hand. Just don't let it interfere with our social obligations, was his only concern. That was his ultimate measure of value, how well I performed as his date to a client dinner. It was the perfect disguise. He couldn't see my ambition because he couldn't imagine it being real. The sheer effort of maintaining the facade, being the polite, slightly naive wife by day and the driven financial strategist by night, was exhausting. I was living two completely separate lives under the same roof. Every day was a tightrope walk over the abyss of discovery. But every small step forward, every successful registration, every piece of software I managed to purchase and hide, filled me with a quiet, fierce joy. I was taking control. My first client came through a stroke of luck at our local coffee shop. I wasn't even looking that day. I was just trying to grab a quick latte before heading back to my continuing education office. I overheard Camila Rodriguez, Elena in the original, the owner of a growing catering business, complaining loudly about the expensive quotes she'd received from financial advisors. I can't afford $10,000 for a financial plan, but I'm losing money somewhere and can't figure out where, she told her business partner. Her voice was laced with desperation and frustration. I took a deep breath, walked over to her table, and introduced myself. I explained my background, my full-time job, and offered to help her at a fraction of the cost with the understanding that I was building my portfolio. I was upfront about being new to the consulting side, but I promised her my dedication. Camila took a chance on me, and honestly, the results exceeded both our expectations. I spent 3 weeks meticulously going over every ledger, every vendor contract, and every cash flow statement. I identified inefficiencies in her cash flow, restructured her payment terms with vendors, and created an investment strategy for her profits that increased her returns by 40% in the first quarter. It wasn't magic, it was just common sense accounting applied with dedication. The transformation was dramatic enough that she referred me to other small business owners in her network. Working with Camila not only gave me my first success story, but also a genuine friendship, something I had been missing in Preston's curated social circle. She was authentic, hardworking, and appreciated my skills in a way my husband never had. "You have a gift, Iris," she told me over coffee one day. "You understand money in ways that help real people build real wealth. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That simple validation meant more than any diamond Preston had ever bought me. It felt earned. I started working late nights while Preston was away on his increasingly frequent business trips. I converted our walk-in closet in the guest bedroom into a makeshift office for client calls, using blankets to dampen the sound. I had to take calls in hushed tones, sometimes pretending I was on the phone with my mother or a college friend. Every new client was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because my business was growing, terrifying because discovery would mean confrontation. The learning curve was steep. I made mistakes, undercharging for complex projects, occasionally overpromising on timelines. But I learned quickly. Each client taught me something new about running a business, about setting boundaries, about valuing my own expertise. I was building not just wealth, but experience. I used my savings to invest in essential software and certifications, carefully hiding the charges among household expenses or making cash purchases. I bought a high-end financial modeling program and logged the expense on our joint account as new kitchen software. Preston never noticed. Why would he? He was too busy looking down at me. My client list grew steadily over the course of a year, primarily through referrals and word of mouth. Rather than spending the profits, I reinvested most of them back into the business and began setting aside a portion for strategic investments. I knew every dollar I kept liquid was a tool for my eventual freedom. Preston remained oblivious, attributing my increasing confidence to finally adjusting to our lifestyle rather than professional fulfillment. He saw a subtle shift in my posture, but he interpreted it as my gratitude for his guidance, not the quiet strength of my own financial success. It was the perfect cloak of invisibility. A pivotal moment came when I worked with a tech startup founder whose financial restructuring after my consultation helped her secure a major funding round. This wasn't just a win, it was a game changer. I was operating on a different level now. The success story was even featured in a Nashville business magazine. I had to decline being mentioned by name, citing privacy reasons. My secret was too valuable to risk, but the credibility it gave me instantly brought me access to larger, more complex clients. Through Camila, I met Geneva Chen, Patricia in the original, a serial entrepreneur who had sold her previous company for 8 figures and was launching a fintech startup. Geneva was everything Preston pretended to be: sharp, genuinely successful, and respected. She initially hired me for a small project, but quickly became both a valued client and mentor. "You're charging too little for your expertise," she told me bluntly after reviewing my rate sheet. It was a hard truth, but I needed to hear it. Triple your prices and watch how your perceived value changes. She was right. When I raised my rates, instead of losing clients, I attracted more established businesses willing to pay for quality. That was a lesson I took not just in business, but in life. Setting a higher price sets a boundary and commands respect. Geneva also introduced me to the world of angel investing and strategic portfolio management. She taught me that the money I was accumulating needed to be active. "Cash loses value sitting still," she explained. "You need to make your money work for you." Under her guidance, I began making strategic investments in emerging companies, including Geneva's new venture, which focused on AI-driven financial planning tools. I started with small amounts, but as my business grew, so did my investment portfolio. I even put some money into a diversified college fund-style growth portfolio, just for the future, a future I would choose. The exhilaration of watching both my business and investments grow was intoxicating. For the first time since meeting Preston, I felt truly alive, purposeful, and independent. I was building something valuable entirely on my own merits. I wasn't just existing in Preston's shadow, I was creating my own light. Throughout this period, I maintained the appearance of being just Preston's wife at social functions. I nodded politely when his colleagues' wives discussed their shopping trips and charity committees. I attended his work dinners and played the supportive spouse role flawlessly, all while running a growing business from our home and making investment decisions that would alter the course of my life. I remember one particularly boring dinner party where Preston's boss asked me what I did. I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I just help with the bookkeeping at a small firm." Preston gave me an approving nod. He thought I was being humble. I was being brilliant. My double life was exhausting but empowering. Each new client, each successful consultation, each investment return was a step toward the freedom I increasingly realized I needed, from my controlling marriage. For years into our marriage, the facade began to crumble. It didn't start with a dramatic argument or a hidden lipstick stain. It started with a text message. Preston was in the shower, and a preview popped up on his phone's lock screen. The name was just Brooke. The message read, "Missing you already." It disappeared before I could read more, but it planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. That little piece of text felt like a physical blow, a cold realization. Preston had been more distant than usual, often coming home smelling of unfamiliar perfume that he claimed was from hugging colleagues goodbye at networking events. I had always swallowed the excuses before. Now, I saw them for what they were: lies. Rather than confronting him immediately, I decided to investigate. The old Iris would have screamed, cried, and begged for the truth. The new Iris was a financial strategist. I approached this like a corporate due diligence audit. I noted his patterns. The late Thursday meetings that always ran until after 9 o'clock. The weekend conferences that never had websites I could find. The sudden increase in client dinners at a specific upscale restaurant downtown. I drove myself to the office every day, but I was barely focusing on my spreadsheets. My mind was a relentless detective board, connecting dots, eliminating possibilities, and focusing on irrefutable evidence. The following Thursday, I put my plan into action. I told Preston I was visiting Camila to help with a special corporate event at her catering company. I made sure to sound stressed and busy, the kind of professional stress he approved of. Instead, I parked my car near the restaurant he frequented and waited. The night was cold, and I sat there, trying to keep my breathing even. Every minute felt like an hour. At 8:30, his black BMW pulled into the parking lot. 10 minutes later, a red Mercedes arrived, and a woman with blonde hair stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized Brooke Walsh, his colleague from the law firm. I watched them embrace in a way colleagues never would. I saw him kiss her in the parking lot before they entered the restaurant together. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone, my stomach a hollow pit of betrayal and confirmation. It wasn't about the pain anymore, it was about the evidence. I gave them 30 minutes to settle in before I walked into the restaurant. I walked straight past the hostess, my navy blue coat pulled tight around me. They were at a corner table, his hand on hers, leaning in intimately. They looked like a couple discussing their future, not a lawyer and his colleague discussing a case. I approached silently, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I stopped right beside their table. "This explains the late meetings," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. It was a miracle I sounded so calm. Preston jerked back, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and finally settling on annoyance at being caught. Brooke had the decency to look embarrassed, gathering her purse and mumbling something about using the restroom. She scurried away, leaving us alone. "Iris, this isn't what it looks like," Preston began, using the same smooth tone he employed with difficult clients. "Really?" I shot back. "Because it looks like you're having dinner with your girlfriend while your wife thinks you're working." The conversation that followed was surreal. We were having a life-altering fight in a public restaurant, all while soft jazz played in the background. Preston offered a half-hearted apology, claimed it was just physical, and then had the audacity to blame me for his infidelity. He always had to be the victim. "You've been so wrapped up in your little accounting projects," he said, lowering his voice as neighboring diners began to notice our tension. He hated being a spectacle. "You've become boring, Iris, unambitious. When was the last time you made an effort in our marriage?" I stared at him. He actually thought my efforts to build a meaningful, independent life were the problem. He didn't see ambition as a quality in a wife, he saw it as a threat. "My effort was building a home and a life you chose to ignore," I said, my voice low and firm. "Your effort was lying and humiliating me." I left the restaurant alone, driving aimlessly for hours before returning home. I drove until the anger was just a cold lump in my chest, replaced by a clear, focused determination. Preston came back past midnight, offering promises to end the affair, suggesting counseling, even proposing a second honeymoon. The desperate damage control was disgusting. For reasons I didn't fully understand then, I pretended to consider reconciliation. "I need time," I told him, which wasn't a lie. I needed time, not to forgive him, but to plan my next steps. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception on both our parts. Preston became temporarily attentive, bringing flowers, suggesting date nights, while I began consulting with divorce attorneys during my supposed meetings with clients. Geneva had recommended Jessamine Torres, Rebecca in the original, a formidable divorce lawyer in Nashville. Our first meeting was entirely transactional, just business. Jessamine laid out the reality of my situation. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, she explained. Without a prenuptial agreement, the court will divide marital assets based on what they deem fair, not necessarily equal. I learned about our financial entanglements, the complexity of divorcing someone with family money, and the importance of documenting everything. Knowledge is power, especially in divorce, Jessamine said. Her quiet confidence was exactly what I needed. My cautious information gathering came to an abrupt halt when Preston discovered my browser history on our shared computer. I had forgotten to use private browsing for one search, Tennessee Divorce Asset Division Process. I felt a rush of adrenaline and ice water at the same time. His rage was immediate and frightening. He cornered me in our kitchen, waving his phone with the screenshot he'd taken. "Is this what you've been doing?" he snarled, his face red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "Planning to divorce me and take my money? Let me make this clear, Iris. You'll have nothing without me. Nothing. My family's lawyers will make sure of it." I remained calm, which only infuriated him more. "I'm not planning anything, Preston. I was just researching after what happened. Wouldn't you do the same?" He seemed mollified by my explanation, but the threat lingered between us. That night, I moved all my important business documents to secure cloud storage and began transferring digital records to drives I kept in a safety deposit box Preston knew nothing about. I was preparing for war. The final discovery came 3 weeks later. I was organizing our closet, a task Preston never participated in, when I found a jewelry receipt tucked inside his dress shoes. It was from Tiffany & Company, dated 2 months prior, for a diamond tennis bracelet costing nearly $12,000. $12,000. I had never received such a gift. Even knowing about the affair, this evidence of his tangible investment in another woman stung in a way I hadn't expected. He had spent our money, supposedly our money, on Brooke. That money could have paid for a down payment on a small house, but he used it as a bribe for his mistress. Before I could fully process this new betrayal, I heard the front door open. Voices. Preston and a woman laughing in our entryway. I froze in our closet as they entered our bedroom, clearly not expecting me home in the middle of the day. My heart hammered in my chest, but the rage was a cold, quiet burn. I didn't panic, I just got ready. I stepped out to find Preston and Brooke embracing at the foot of our bed, the bed we had shared for 4 years. Brooke looked terrified, and Preston looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "Iris," Preston exclaimed, not bothering to step away from Brooke. "You're supposed to be at work." "I took a half day," I replied, surprised by my own composure. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't crying. I was a witness. Clearly, I should have called first. What followed was not the emotional confrontation movies had prepared me for. Instead, Preston became coldly pragmatic. He saw he was caught, and he immediately pivoted to control. "Well, this saves me having to have a difficult conversation," he said, straightening his tie. He smoothed down his collar, already thinking about the legal implications. "I want a divorce, Iris. Brooke and I are planning a future together." His confidence was absolute as he outlined his terms. He would generously allow me to keep my personal items and a small settlement that would help me get back on my feet. The house, our investments, even the furniture we had purchased together would remain his. "My lawyers will be in touch," he concluded, seemingly confused by my lack of hysteria or pleading. "You should find somewhere else to stay starting tonight." That was the last straw. The arrogance was breathtaking. "Actually," I said, stepping closer to the bed, "as this is still legally my residence, too. I'll be staying. You and Brooke are welcome to find a hotel." His face darkened at my defiance, but Brooke, terrified of being part of a public scene, tugged at his arm. "Let's go, Preston. We can deal with this later." As they left, Preston turned back with one parting shot. His voice was a venomous whisper. "You'll regret not taking my generous offer." By the time my lawyers are done, you'll be lucky to afford a trailer park in the worst part of Nashville. I closed the door behind them, leaned against it, and for the first time since discovering his affair, I smiled. Preston had no idea what was coming. The day after I caught Preston and Brooke in our bedroom, he moved most of his clothes and personal items out of the house. He didn't even leave a note. I changed the locks that same afternoon, legally questionable, maybe, but it gave me time to properly document our belongings before he could remove anything valuable. I was establishing my territory. Preston's assumption about my financial naivety quickly became apparent in the initial settlement offer his lawyer sent over. A one-time payment of $50,000 and 6 months of living expenses. In exchange, I would make no claims on any of our other assets, including the house I had helped furnish and maintain over 4 years. $50,000. He thought I was that cheap. He's testing the waters, Jessamine explained when I showed her the offer. She was calm and professional, exactly what I needed. He's assuming you don't know your rights or the true extent of your marital assets. With Jessamine's guidance, I formally rejected the offer and began the process of financial discovery, a legal mechanism requiring both parties to disclose all assets and liabilities. I was demanding full transparency. Preston's response was to have his lawyer, Thaddeus Harrison, David in the original, delay and obfuscate at every turn. They missed deadlines, sent incomplete paperwork, and generally acted like they were above the process. This is a standard tactic, Jessamine assured me. They're hoping to drain your resources and patience until you accept less than you deserve. What Preston didn't realize was that I wasn't depending on his disclosures. I had been tracking our joint finances meticulously for years, including accounts he thought I didn't know about. I had copies of every joint tax return, every bank statement, and every brokerage confirmation. I knew the true value of his stock portfolio and the exact date he opened that private offshore account he thought was so clever. More importantly, I had my own growing resources that he knew nothing about. I had my fortress. After careful consideration and consultation with Jessamine, we made a strategic decision. I would temporarily withhold the true scope of my business and investments during the initial phases of negotiation. It was a calculated risk. Tennessee law generally considered businesses started during marriage to be marital property. But Jessamine identified a potential exception based on the fact that Preston had actively discouraged my business and provided no support, financial or otherwise, in its creation. We'll disclose everything at the right time, she assured me. But for now, let's let him believe his own narrative about you. We were setting a trap, and Preston was walking right into it, blinded by his own arrogance. While the legal process inched forward, Preston launched a social offensive. Mutual friends began avoiding my calls. Invitations to social events dried up. Even our neighbors, who had always been friendly, became coldly professional. I later learned that Preston had been spreading a narrative that I had cheated on him, that I was mentally unstable, and that he was divorcing me despite his best efforts to save our marriage. In the circles where his family name carried weight, his version of events was accepted without question. The pain of this social exile was unexpectedly sharp. People I had shared holidays with, celebrated milestones with, shared confidences with, all vanished from my life based on Preston's lies. It was a reminder that their friendship had always been tied to Preston's status, not my character. All except Camila and Geneva, who never wavered in their support. They were my rock. People who believe gossip without hearing both sides aren't worth your energy, Camila told me over emergency pastries in her catering kitchen after a particularly difficult day. Focus on building your new life, not mourning the old one. Preston's attempts to intimidate me escalated as he realized I wasn't going to quietly accept his terms. There were late-night phone calls with thinly veiled threats about making sure you never work in the city again, and even a suggestion that he would report my business for tax irregularities. He was grasping at straws. It was an empty threat since my business finances were meticulously documented. I'd done my homework, Preston. His family joined the pressure campaign. His mother, Lucille, called to reason with me. We always knew you weren't right for Preston, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But we accepted you because he chose you. Don't make this difficult, Iris. Take what's being offered and move on with dignity. I maintained my composure through it all. A skill I had perfected during years of enduring subtle put-downs at Shannon family gatherings. Thank you for your concern, Lucille, I said, keeping my voice even. I'll be guided by my attorney's advice. I hung up the phone and took 3 deep breaths. Her efforts only strengthened my resolve. Preston's overconfidence began working against him. Believing I had no resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, he made several critical mistakes. He failed to disclose investment accounts that I had documentation for. He underreported the value of his stock portfolio. He claimed certain assets were separate property when they had been clearly purchased with marital funds. Jessamine documented each discrepancy meticulously, building a case that would eventually undermine his credibility with the court. She was building a paper trail of his deception, and it was going to hit him like a freight train. Meanwhile, my company experienced exponential growth during the separation period. A financial restructuring plan I designed for a regional restaurant chain helped them avoid bankruptcy and triple their profits, leading to features in industry publications. I had to decline interviews, citing personal reasons. I couldn't risk my face being on the cover while my divorce was pending, but the professional recognition brought in a flood of new clients. My reputation was soaring, quietly. The major breakthrough came when I secured a contract with a national retail chain to overhaul their entire financial strategy, a 6-figure deal that transformed my business from successful to exceptional. The moment that contract was signed, I knew I had officially transcended the need for Preston's money, his name, or his approval. I was a legitimate power player in Nashville, and no one knew it. I hired 4 employees, rented a professional office space in downtown Nashville, and began turning down clients whose values didn't align with my company's mission. All of this happened as Preston and his legal team continued to characterize me as a struggling bookkeeper dependent on her husband's support. His perception of me as the naive small-town girl dazzled by his wealth had calcified to the point where he couldn't conceive of my success independent of him. He had built a mental cage for me, and he was convinced I was still trapped inside. During this time, Geneva introduced me to a group of angel investors looking to fund promising fintech startups. My combination of practical financial expertise and technology vision impressed them enough to offer seed funding for a revolutionary financial planning app one had been developing. I had developed the entire business plan and modeling during those late-night study sessions in the guest bedroom. The app, which used AI to provide personalized financial advice for small businesses and individuals, launched in beta with overwhelming positive response. Within 6 months, we had 50,000 users and were fielding acquisition offers from major financial institutions. This wasn't just my little job, this was Silicon Valley-level growth, happening right here in Nashville. I also made strategic investments in several other startups, leveraging my network and financial expertise to identify companies with exceptional growth potential. My portfolio diversified across technology, real estate, and emerging markets, all carefully managed to maximize returns while minimizing risk. The night before our final court date, I sat alone in the house that had never felt like home, reflecting on my journey. For years earlier, I had been so eager to please Preston that I had begun to lose myself. His betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to rediscover my strength, ambition, and worth. I packed a small overnight bag. Regardless of the judge's decision, I had decided I would not spend another night in the space where my marriage had unraveled. My new penthouse apartment was ready, purchased through an LLC Preston knew nothing about, furnished with pieces I had chosen for their beauty and comfort rather than their status value. It was quiet, it was elegant, and every piece of furniture was mine. As I zipped the bag closed, my phone chimed with a text from Geneva. "Remember who you are tomorrow," it read. "Not who he tried to make you be." With those words in my heart, I prepared to face the final act of my divorce to Preston Shannon. The morning of our court date dawned clear and crisp. I dressed in a navy blue suit, conservative but confident, with a single piece of jewelry, a small diamond pendant Camila and Geneva had given me to mark my business's 2nd anniversary. Your Independence Diamond, they had called it. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, as Jessamine had advised. Preston was already there, looking expensive in a tailored charcoal suit. His attorney, Thaddeus Harrison, a senior partner at one of Nashville's most prestigious law firms with a reputation for aggressive settlements, stood beside him. Preston smirked when he saw me, leaning over to whisper something to Thaddeus that made both men chuckle. His confidence was palpable. He truly believed this was merely a formality before his inevitable victory. Jessamine arrived moments later, immaculate in a burgundy suit that stood out against the courthouse's muted colors. Unlike Thaddeus, with his team of junior associates, Jessamine worked with precision and purpose, radiating a quiet competence that had reassured me from our first meeting. "Ready?" she asked, her expression giving nothing away. "More than ready," I replied. Judge Catherine Williams' courtroom was intimidating in its austerity. The judge herself, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and penetrating eyes, had a reputation for fairness but little patience for games or emotional displays. As proceedings began, Preston put on a performance worthy of an Oscar. His testimony painted him as the devoted husband who had supported his wife's modest career ambitions only to be repaid with ingratitude and unreasonable demands in the divorce. "I just want a fair resolution, Your Honor," he said, his voice modulated to convey reasonable disappointment. "I've offered Mrs. Shannon a generous settlement that would allow her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle while she rebuilds her career." Thaddeus presented their case for the division of assets, highlighting Preston's family wealth as separate property, minimizing my contributions to our marital assets, and suggesting that the house purchased primarily with his earnings should remain his property. Throughout their presentation, I maintained my composure, neither reacting to Preston's fabrications nor revealing my emotions. Judge Williams occasionally glanced my way, her expression unreadable. When it came time to sign the initial divorce decree, separating our marital status while financial matters were finalized, Preston made a show of it. He signed with a flourish, a laugh escaping his lips as he capped his expensive pen. As he returned to his seat, he passed close enough to whisper, "Enjoy going back to your parents' farm." Jessamine's presentation began methodically, her approach a stark contrast to Thaddeus's theatrical arguments. She presented evidence of Preston's financial deceptions during our marriage, the hidden accounts, the lavish spending on Brooke, and the pattern of financial control. "Your Honor," Jessamine said, "Mr. Shannon has not been forthcoming about the full extent of marital assets as required by Tennessee law." She submitted documentation of accounts Preston had failed to disclose, including dates, account numbers, and approximate balances. Preston shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Jessamine continued, his smug expression giving way to nervous glances at Thaddeus. Thaddeus requested a brief recess, which Judge Williams denied. "I believe we should continue, Counselor. I'm particularly interested in hearing about these undisclosed assets." The atmosphere in the courtroom tensed as Jessamine methodically dismantled Preston's financial deceptions. Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Jessamine continued, "we request that the court consider Mrs. Shannon's separate property that was established during the marriage, but without any contribution or support from Mr. Shannon." This was the moment we had prepared for. Judge Williams looked up from her notes. "Please elaborate, Counselor." "Mrs. Shannon established a financial consulting business during the marriage. Mr. Shannon not only provided no support for this venture, but actively discouraged it and belittled her professional ambitions, as evidenced by these communications." Jessamine presented emails and text messages where Preston had dismissed my business as a hobby and discouraged my entrepreneurial goals. Judge Williams reviewed the documents carefully before addressing me directly for the first time. "Mrs. Shannon, the court requires full financial disclosure from both parties. Have you submitted complete information about this business venture?" "Not yet, Your Honor," I replied as we had planned. "My complete financial statement is ready for submission today." Jessamine handed the court clerk a sealed envelope containing my complete financial disclosure. The document we had strategically held back until this moment. "I request that the court review Mrs. Shannon's financial statement before making any determinations about asset division," Jessamine said. Judge Williams nodded and opened the envelope. The courtroom fell silent as she read, her eyebrows rising slightly. It was the only indication of surprise from the otherwise composed judge. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Williams looked up. For the record, I will read the summary of Mrs. Shannon's assets. My heart pounded as she began to read. Iris Mitchell Financial Solutions, a financial consulting firm established 3 years ago. Current valuation based on revenue, contracts, and intellectual property, $2,100,000. Preston's head snapped up, his expression of disbelief almost comical. Investment portfolio, including technology stocks, real estate, and startup investments, $11,900,000. Preston gripped the table, his knuckles white. Real estate holdings, 2 properties purchased within the last 18 months, valued at $1,200,000. By now, Preston looked physically ill, his face drained of color, his body rigid with shock. Beside him, Thaddeus was frantically whispering, but Preston seemed unable to process what he was hearing. Total disclosed assets, $5,200,000, Judge Williams concluded. The courtroom remained silent. Preston stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound relief that the truth was finally on record. Judge Williams broke the silence. Mr. Shannon, do you wish to revise any of your previous statements regarding Mrs. Shannon's financial dependence on you? Preston seemed incapable of speech. If you're still listening, please help me like the video and comment the number 1 below, so I know that you're amazing, and I understand that you've been with me throughout this journey. Your help is a massive encouragement, cheering me on. Please comment the number 1 so I can recognize you, and now, listen to me continue my story. Thaddeus stood quickly. Your Honor, we were unaware of these assets. We contend that as they were acquired during the marriage, Mr. Shannon is entitled to an equitable portion. He finally found his voice, trying to salvage the situation. Jessamine was prepared for this argument. She knew the moment Thaddeus would try to claim half of my life's work. Your Honor, we direct the court's attention to the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties prior to marriage, specifically Clause 15. This was our ace. When reviewing our prenup years after signing, Jessamine had discovered a clause Preston's own lawyers had included. Any business enterprise created by either spouse during the marriage without capital investment from the other spouse shall remain separate property in the event of divorce. Jessamine explained, the clause was likely included to protect Mr. Shannon's potential ventures. However, the language applies equally to Mrs. Shannon's business, which she built without any financial contribution from Mr. Shannon. Judge Williams reviewed the prenuptial agreement, nodding slowly. The language is indeed clear. Ms. Torres, please continue. Jessamine outlined how I had built my business from scratch, using my own savings and reinvesting profits, all while Preston actively discouraged my efforts. She presented statements from Camila and Geneva, my clients and mentors, attesting to my independent work and business acumen. Throughout Jessamine's presentation, I watched Preston, the man who had laughed while signing our divorce papers just hours earlier, now sat frozen, his confident demeanor shattered. He didn't just look defeated, he looked hollow. Brooke, who had been sitting in the gallery, slipped out of the courtroom, her expression unreadable. I guess his $12,000 bracelet wasn't enough to keep her around for the aftermath. Judge Williams took 20 minutes to review all documents before delivering her ruling. When she returned, her decision was clear. Based on the evidence presented and the terms of the prenuptial agreement, the court finds that Iris Mitchell Financial Solutions and the resulting investment portfolio constitute separate property belonging solely to Mrs. Shannon. Preston made a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a protest. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, given Mr. Shannon's failure to fully disclose marital assets as required by law, the court is inclined to view the division of remaining marital assets in a light more favorable to Mrs. Shannon. The rest of her ruling was a blur of legal terms, but the outcome was clear. I would keep my business, my investments, and my properties. Additionally, I would receive a greater portion of our actual marital assets due to Preston's deception. The house would be sold with proceeds divided according to the judge's formula, which heavily favored me. As we stood to leave, Preston approached me, his lawyer trying unsuccessfully to hold him back. "You planned this," he hissed, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "All these years, you were just waiting to take me down." I looked at the man I had once loved, now a stranger consumed by his own narrative of victimhood. "No, Preston. I built something while you were busy destroying what we had. That's the difference between us." Jessamine gently guided me away, leaving Preston standing alone in the emptying courtroom, the remnants of his superiority complex lying in shambles around him. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt less like a victory and more like liberation. The weight of deception, both Preston's and my own necessary secrecy, lifted from my shoulders with each step down those marble stairs. Today, my company has expanded internationally. My investments continue to grow, and I've used my resources to establish a foundation helping women achieve financial independence. Preston attempted reconciliation once he knew my net worth. He called Jessamine asking if I'd consider a business partnership. I just laughed. But I had moved far beyond the woman who once sought his approval. If you're watching this and facing your own crossroads of underestimation or betrayal, remember that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to prove them spectacularly wrong? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their value isn't defined by anyone else's perception. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you directly to what you truly deserve. And so, Iris's journey reminds us of one powerful truth: our worth is not defined by anyone else's perception, but by the strength we find within ourselves. Life will often place obstacles in our path, challenges that can make us feel small or unworthy. But it's during these moments of doubt and betrayal that we are given the opportunity to rediscover who we truly are. Iris didn't just survive, she thrived, proving that resilience, courage, and self-belief can transform even the most painful endings into extraordinary new beginnings. This story is a testament to the importance of knowing your value and never letting anyone diminish your potential. It's a reminder that independence, whether emotional, financial, or personal, is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. When we invest in our growth and trust our capabilities, we build a foundation that no one can take away. What did this story teach you about resilience and self-worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below or simply write good if this reflection resonated with you. Your voice matters, and your journey is just as important.